quiet town tucked in the foothills of the Ramapo Mountains, Tuxedo, New York was once a private hunting and fishing reserve for the wealthy during the late 19th century. It grew steadily in its early days, but over time became a shell of itself in the wake of the construction of the New York State Thruway. Today, Tuxedo can be described as a small, quiet town stuck somewhere between the past and the present, but doing its best to push on. As pleasant as it may be, Tuxedo has a few literal skeletons in its closet, as it is the home of multiple unsolved murders. On the afternoon of October 25th, 1952, two men went hunting in the woods. The next day, two teenagers stumbled upon their dead bodies sprawled next to their vehicle not far into the trail. Lying between them was a deer carcass. The men were Robert Nugent, a 43-year-old from Sloatsburg, New York, and Charles Simpson, a 38-year-old from Ridgewood, New Jersey. Nugent was a war hero who lost both of his legs during World War II. After the war, he became the Ramapo town clerk. Charles Simpson was the treasurer of the North Jersey Trust Company. The two were friends and liked to go hunting together. Both of them expected to be home by evening as they both had plans, but they never returned home. A search party was sent off into the woods to find them. Nugent and Simpson were not found until the next morning when two teenagers stumbled across their dead bodies while hiking in the woods. The two boys alerted police. In 1952, the Sloatsburg police chief was William Teeter Conklin. He put in a call to the New York State Police since the murder had taken place in Tuxedo, New York and was out of his jurisdiction. But they didn't come for 6 hours. In those 6 hours, many locals and reporters came to see what was going on, which left the crime scene compromised. During the crime scene investigation, investigators recovered 5 shotgun shells and a deer liver that was wrapped in a small bush. Nugent's Jeep was nearby with Nugent and Simpson's shotguns both in the Jeep. Simpson was found with shots to his head and back. Nugent was hit in the head and the hip. So they were shot a combined 4 times. 5 shotgun shells were found. The 5 shell casings found at the scene deduces that the killer or killers most likely missed one of their shots, since Nugent and Simpson's guns were still in the Jeep. The murders of Robert Nugent and Charles Simpson happened 68 years ago and remains unsolved today. But there are some theories as to what happened that fateful October day. The first theory is that Nugent and Simpson were killed by poachers. The two men were found with a deer carcass laying between them. Robert Nugent was the town clerk, which at the time made him responsible for selling hunting and fishing licenses to locals. It is theorized that Nugent and Simpson probably crossed paths with a man or men who were carrying a deer out of the woods. Open season for deer hunting didn't start for a few more weeks. Many believe that these poachers might have recognized Nugent as the guy who gives out hunting licenses and didn't want to get in any trouble, so they killed the two men. A few miles into the woods, police found tracks of deer blood where the deer was skinned. They found broken bushes where the poachers would have dragged the deer down a slope. This was only a half-mile farther into the woods from where Nugent and Simpson were found. During a later testimony, Sloatsburg Police Chief William Conklin testified that the deer had been dead for nearly 2 weeks because it was laying there blackened. Others speculate that the deer was killed 2 weeks prior and was cleaned of its meats at the time of the killing. The poachers then went back in to clean up the rest of their kill the day they saw Nugent and Simpson inspecting the dead deer. The poachers would have been behind Nugent and Simpson if they stumbled upon them, explaining the gunshots to the back and the hip of the two men. The next theory is that Sloatsburg resident John Youmans murdered Robert Nugent and Charles Simpson. He was one of the 100 people questioned by police after the killings, but nothing came of the questioning for another 28 years. In 1980, Philomena Kessler, the sister of John Youmans, went to the police and said that her brother John Youmans was responsible for the murders. In 1981, John Youmans was brought in for trial. His sister Philomena testified against him, saying that he murdered Simpson and Nugent, but their mother made her and her siblings swear a vow of secrecy to never tell anyone. Throughout the trial, the prosecution produced 27 witnesses, including some of John's other siblings. John Youmans was not convicted, with jurors saying, "We were split right down the middle." That's when we had the testimony of the brother and sister read back to us and realized that there were inconsistencies. There wasn't enough evidence either. Bullets and things like that were missing. These bullets were the 5 shotgun shells recovered from the scene of the crime, but at some point in the 1960s, the shells were lost in the state police lab. Other things, the murder weapon, a shotgun, was never produced during the 14-day trial. Another juror said the credibility of the witnesses was questionable. The case really stood or fell on the statements of those people, and we were not convinced of his guilt. The final theory is that these murders were mob-related. Around this time, there were other murders that took place nearby in the surrounding areas, where the bodies were found and traced back to a run-in with the Mafia. It's been 68 years since October 25, 1952, and the murders of Robert Nugent and Charles Simpson continue to remain a mystery, lost and forgotten in the shadows of Tuxedo, New York.